Hello, and welcome to this video. This is a start of a deconversion series. Deconversion from Roman Catholic to Secular Atheist. I wrote this summary of that deconversion experience back in 2013. So there's 7 chapters of various lengths that I wrote in Word documents with pictures that recount everything from the beginning of my Catholic indoctrination and development to the basically attending college, taking philosophy, and with the power of philosophy plus atheist YouTubers helped me wise up to the true state of religious authority. So we're going to start at the very beginning, and I'm thinking this video might be first 2 chapters, then the next video will be subsequent chapters, since the first one's very short. So, chapter 1, early childhood, ages 4 to 7. So I'm just going to read it, and I haven't read this since, I wrote it, so that's roughly 12 years ago. So we'll see how it goes, and then I'll add any extra commentary if necessary. I was fortunate enough to have a fantastic childhood. I lived in a great home with loving parents and all the toys I ever wanted, basically spoiled. My religious beliefs originated the way most do, from my parents. My mother was Catholic, and my father was on the way to becoming one. They taught me how to pray before every meal, as well as before bed each night. I learned to say the famous Catholic prayers, Our Father and Hail Mary. Before I even knew what they meant, I was reciting these. My parents told me that God created everything. Makes sense. You wonder why everything's here, or somebody created it. And this is a screenshot of the catechism book that I had that was from the 60s. So they told me God created everything, including myself, and that he loved me. I also went to Mass with them every Sunday, and I learned more about this God from the priest at church. Not really paying attention perfectly, but, as a little kid, kind of via osmosis, sort of takes in facts slowly but surely. When I was 4 years old, I started to go to a private Catholic school in South San Francisco called Mater Dolorosa. We all had to wear blue uniforms, and we started each day with a religion class where we learned all the basics of the Christian faith, like heaven, the 10 Commandments, angels, and the resurrection of Jesus. At this point in my life, like most kids that age, I also believed in the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus. So believing in things like heaven and angels wasn't much of a stretch. When I was first learning how to read at about 6 years old, I know, kind of late compared to my kids, I was given the Beginner's Bible to read whenever I had time, usually before bed or after bed. This is how I learned about all the famous Bible stories. At that age, I was also preparing to receive First Communion. I was always very curious about how the wafer tasted. Before I could receive Holy Communion, I had to study a book called the First Communion Catechism, which explained that the gates of heaven had been locked since Adam and Eve, our supposed first ancestral parents, disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden. Jesus had to come down to earth and then die on a cross for our sins so that the gates of heaven could be opened again and we would be free to enter heaven when we die. I also learned that the sin of Adam and Eve by eating the tree of the fruit was called original sin, and as their children or descendants, we were all born with that sin on our souls. In order to wash it away, everyone needed the sacrament of baptism because no one with sin on their souls could actually enter heaven. So, very brief first chapter. Let's move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2, ages 7 through 11, Catechism and the Saints. In 2nd grade, I told my mom that I was learning bad words from my fellow students at school. Yeah, I was about 7 years old at this point. So around the time my father officially converted to Catholicism and was baptized, my mom decided to take me out of that Mater Dolorosa school and started homeschooling me using the Seton homeschool curriculum. It was then that I began to really learn the theological content of my religion, instead of the crayon Catholicism, as I think Dinesh D'Souza likes to call it. It all started off with the Baltimore Catechism number 1, which gave me a more thorough account of all the Catholic teachings and the importance of the Catholic sacraments. I learned about purgatory, as well as the origin of the devil and why he fell from heaven. Along with that book came a series of VHS videos. These were Disney-style animated features that portrayed the life stories of the saints. And it's funny, side note, these VHS Disney-style religious cartoons were coming out at the same time as the 90s Disney Renaissance, which I also enjoyed. At the time, they were very entertaining because I was told that everything that happened in these stories were true, including the miraculous and supernatural events in them. It made me want to witness something supernatural for myself very badly. I had often begged Jesus or Mary to appear to me or to perform some sort of miracle the way they did for the characters in the videos, often kids, so I could see them for myself. And I often wondered why they never did. The next year, I moved on to the Baltimore Catechism number 2, which was the most advanced catechism you could buy next to the original. At least that's what I understood at the time. My dad even joked at the time that he wasn't even on that book yet, so I was ahead of him. Well, it makes sense. He was a new Catholic. I continued to learn about the saints, this time from books that were either read to me by my mom, usually, who was my homeschool teacher, or I read myself. The stories in them were always about the extreme struggle to live for God's will despite the most hostile and unpleasant conditions. In these stories, more often than not, what felt good led to evil, and what caused suffering led to holiness. It was through these books that it became apparent to me that my eternal soul was at stake. My soul would continue on after death and eventually end up in either hell or heaven for all eternity. Every choice I made in life would have a significant impact on the outcome of my soul, and unless I was a devout Catholic, I was most likely headed to hell or a long time in purgatory. Purgatory was supposedly just as bad as hell, only it was not eternal, it was temporary. But that still meant it could be thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. So it was clear to me that it was not worth a few brief moments of happiness or pleasure on earth to put my eternal soul at risk. Not only that, but it was apparent through these stories and the teachings of the Catechism that the devil himself was actively trying to drag me and every other good Catholic away from God and down to hell, using things like pleasure as a trap. I was told that I needed the Catholic Church and the sacraments from the Catholic Church to fend off his efforts and give me the grace, like the magic sauce, to live my life devoted to God. I was taught that the more I learned about God and the more I prayed to him, the closer I would be to him and to his protection. Doing these holy things would also make it easier for me to believe in him. Apparently, the biggest trick the devil used to drag souls to hell was to convince people he does not exist. And I sure didn't want to fall for that trick. I knew the devil was real, and that allowed me to protect myself. If I was scared at night, even saying the name Jesus or making the sign of the cross would be enough to fend off any of the devil's evil spirits, which were called demons, like his little soldiers or minions. My reasons for belief at this point were still composed of only two things: trust in my parents' word, including the books they taught me with, so trust in their authority, and the mere possibility of an afterlife, of an eternal afterlife. I adopted a Pascal's wager sort of philosophy before I even heard of Pascal. I figured if I decided to believe in God, I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And if I decided to disbelieve in God and I was wrong, I had nothing to gain and everything to lose. As Catholics, we were told to love God with all our hearts, all our minds, all our souls, and all of our strength. And they literally said all those words. I took this seriously and let this attitude shape my emotions, my child emotions towards God and Jesus, or my concepts of them, through these early formative years of my life. I did feel real love and admiration for him, at least what I thought was him. Many of the saints I learned about were praised because of the suffering they endured for their steadfast belief in and love for God, especially the martyrs. And here's like the Christians being fed to lions in the Roman Colosseum picture. In Catholicism, suffering was never meaningless. It could always win you or your loved ones graces from God. I took this very seriously. I remember one night I was exhausted, but I stayed awake on my knees, upright, praying the rosary, pushing through each decade no matter how uncomfortable or bored I was. I was really trying to be a saint. After all, only saints went to heaven. I even went so far as to ask my parents, if martyrs go straight to heaven, why don't we move to a country where they still kill Christians so that we can be killed for believing in God and then go straight to heaven sooner? Apparently, I could not do that because God had plans for me to do here on earth. Didn't really buy it, but what could I do? I was a kid. There were two people alive at the time that most Catholics considered to be living saints, and this was in the mid-90s. So, Pope John Paul II and Mother Teresa. They were romanticized and glorified for their holiness and their suffering, and they set the example that every good Catholic was meant to follow. My mom soon found a local Catholic homeschool group where all the Catholic homeschooled kids and their parents that lived in South San Francisco would meet to spend time with each other. We would usually meet once a week on Park Day, which was Wednesdays, as well as on birthdays and holidays. I remember the day before Halloween, we would all celebrate All Saints Day, where we would each wear a costume of our favorite saint. So we didn't give up Halloween, but we had like a holy Halloween right before, but instead of monsters and demons, it was good guys. Along with this homeschool group, my dad found and integrated me into another religious group. It was an Opus Dei boys club, where young men and their fathers would meet to read the Bible, talk about religion, and then go do some fun activity like play basketball or go bowling. This is where I received my first real Bible, a small red pocket-sized one. I was only 8 at the time. I enjoyed reading it, but I never ended up reading the entire thing cover to cover. One of the many things Catholics believe is that every person has their own guardian angel that protects them from harm. And this belief gave me lots of comfort as I fell asleep each night. I mean, we literally had this picture in our house. One day, my younger brother Joseph, who was a toddler at the time, managed to escape the house and run away. Terrified, my mom told me and my brother Gabriel to stay home and pray while she went out looking for him. I remember praying as hard as I could, believing that the harder I prayed, the more likely it would be that Joseph would be safe and that my mom would find him. And sure enough, she did. Afterwards, we all said that it was this guardian angel working overtime that helped protect Joseph that day because Joseph did not get lost, run over, or kidnapped. We gave all the credit to God and to our prayers and to his guardian angel. As I got older, I began to grow out of some of my other beliefs like the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny. However, this sparked a terrifying question in my mind one night. What if guardian angels were not real, just like the Tooth Fairy? And then, of course, by extension, what if God wasn't real? I got out of my bed and with teary eyes, I told my dad, I don't think angels are real. I never see or hear them, and I never see them do anything. It looks exactly like they're not real. How do you know they are real? I just saw it all too clearly that there was no way to distinguish these supernatural beings from imaginary non-existent beings. I began to cry. My parents tried to comfort me, reassuring me that angels really were real. They didn't give me any good reasons that I remember, but I think I needed to believe it, especially because I was sleepy. So once again, I put my trust in my parents' word and went back to sleep. And I totally remember this super clearly. I was like standing in the doorway looking at my dad, who was in the garage, like moving laundry over or something. And my mom was sitting on the lounge chair watching TV in the room next to my same field of view. At that age, I had, or I should say developed, a phobia of parental abandonment. I don't know why, maybe from getting lost at a store or a theme park when I was young, but this tied into my need to believe in my guardian angel. The fear of earthquakes, South San Francisco, was also a looming threat that made a belief in a loving God and guardian angel much more comforting. I remember at that time imagining what it would be like if I found out there was no God, and the picture in my mind looked very nightmarish. I imagined it as waking up in my house all alone, the walls darkened and cardboard signs on the walls facing me with the phrase, "There is no God," scrawled on them with black ink, all messy. Looking back on it, this is all pretty silly, but that is how I felt at the time. One of the first things that helped me solidify my belief in God was a book called It Couldn't Just Happen. It wasn't even a Catholic book. It was a creationist biology book. It basically said, evolutionists claim that all this beautiful biological design just happened by accident. It's obvious there's a creator who designed these complex biological organisms. Heck, some proponents of evolution even faked evidence to convince people that humans evolved from apes. But that's just silly. You can be rest assured that the Christian God was behind all of this magnificent creation. And at that age, reading that book, I bought it hook, line, and sinker. It was super convincing. And I even saw this stupid bumper that eats the Darwin fish, and I thought it was so killer. To add to this conviction, my dad made a very telling comment as we were driving along a lake one day. We could both see a box lying on the shore across the lake. It was white with a red X on the side, and my dad said sarcastically, "That's evolution right there. All the molecules that were needed to make that box just randomly came together in the exact right way at the exact right time to form that box." I later learned that this was a variation of the watchmaker argument proposed by William Paley in 1802. I also saw an episode of Bill Nye where Bill was explaining Lamarck's debunked theory, and then I mistakenly thought he was trying to explain evolution and was supporting it because I guess I wasn't paying attention carefully enough. This was all I knew about evolution at this point. And that year was the first time my parents attended the bi-weekly couple-to-couple league conventions. So I guess I'm still 8 here. Maybe 10, I'm not sure. One of those two. So these couple-to-couple league conventions were basically Catholic programs that emphasized the church's pro-life and anti-contraception ideals. While my parents would listen to lectures with the other like-minded parents, the kids were sent to do more hands-on activities that centered on a Catholic message. We'd play basketball, then listen to counselors, give advice on how to live a more devout and holy life and resist the temptations of the secular world. One of the groups that stood out to me was a band called Radix. They were probably the only Catholic rock band at the time that I know of, at least, and they were very hardcore Catholics that gave a very impassioned and compelling speeches. They were so Catholic that in the middle of a drum solo on one of their CDs, he would say things like, "Pray the rosary, get to confession." Oh my God. They also went so far as to tell us that anyone who saw the movie Titanic, okay, so this has to be 98. So I'm older here. But there were multiple couple-to-couple league conventions. They were every 2 years, but I saw them each time I went. But so this is technically true. They also went so far as to tell us that anyone who saw the movie Titanic committed a mortal sin because of the brief partial nudity in it. A mortal sin is one that gets you into hell, whereas a venial sin only gets you into purgatory. It was after the first CCL conference that we got Dish Satellite TV. So why? Because it was the only provider that hosted the Catholic channel called EWTN, Eternal Word Television Network, which was started by a nun called Mother Angelica. That channel was on frequently in the house growing up. And one of the series on that channel was called In the Beginning, the Bible Stories, which was actually a very well-made anime of the Old Testament. I think the same guy who made I forget what his name is, but he did lots of groundbreaking anime before, and then he decided to make the whole Bible. My parents liked it so much they bought the first VHS set when it came out. It had really good music in it, and it made the Old Testament come alive in a very realistic and often violent way, knowing anime. But violence was never as strong of a concern as sexuality when it came to what we could and couldn't watch or listen to. And there was sexuality in the anime, but it was edited out for the Western audiences. One of the music artists that my parents got into at the time was an Irish singer named Dana. Her songs were very Catholic and were even used for World Youth Day. We were even able to make it to one of her concerts in Sacramento. Her music, my homeschooling, the programming on EWTN like Mother Angelica, Father Groeschel, and Life on the Rock, has like a big picture of the Eucharist, kept our house saturated with Catholic teachings and messages. Our house soon became filled with religious images of Jesus and Mary. And truth be told, it was a very happy and peaceful experience. As a kid, it was amazing to think that the creator of the universe loved us this much, and it was fun to believe in all the neat miracles associated with the Virgin Mary and the saints. It was also fun to ponder what heaven and angels look like. It was also fun to imagine the glory of Jesus' second coming at the end of the world, something I hope to experience in my lifetime. One item of clothing that I was most proud of was my scapular. It was a garment given to St. Simon from the Virgin Mary herself that guaranteed entrance to heaven if you're wearing it when you die. Wearing it made me feel protected. I knew I was much more religious than any other kid my age, and I was proud of that. I figured I was off to a great start, and I was very thankful that I was born in the right religion. LOL. One of the more common themes of Catholicism was its strong anti-abortion sentiment. Even at a young age, abortion was a concern for me. Abortion was legal, yet abortions killed babies. And killing babies is wrong. Seemed pretty simple to me. I was immediately disgusted by anyone who thought that abortion should be illegal. A person is a person, no matter how small or young. Just because a baby isn't born yet doesn't automatically make it not a baby. You can't call an unborn child a fetus all you like. Or you can call an unborn child a fetus all you like, but it's still a baby. I remember we had this poster in my classroom, which was actually just a spare bedroom at home, that said, "Excuse me, America, this is tissue. This is not." I knew that poster wasn't 100% serious because we all knew what pro-choicers meant by tissue, but it was still a relevant point. You could call anyone a bunch of tissue, but that didn't make them not a person. My parents went so far as to add a pro-life message into the end of the Pledge of Allegiance, which we also said every morning. With liberty and justice for all, born and preborn. I was personally so fed up with the abortion issue that I actually wrote a letter to President Clinton. This was not prompted by my parents. This was my own idea. In the letter, I explained to him that abortions do not prevent women from having babies. They kill the babies they already have inside of them. I eventually got a generic letter back from the White House. It said, "Thank you for your concerns. Vice President Gore and I are doing our best to make the world a better place. You can do your part by staying in school," etc., etc. Well, what more could I do? I guess people who didn't have the truth of God in their lives got really dumb. My first personal encounter with death happened a few years later. Don't worry, they're pets. I had these 3 pet fish that I loved dearly. Philly, Nilly, and One-Eyed Willie. For a little over a year, and they all died at the same time. Of course, I was devastated. But a new fear crept in my mind. What I was taught was that only humans go to heaven or hell, and that when animals died, they just died. But this meant I would never see my pets again, ever. This was a horrible thought. In tears, I asked my parents if I would see my pets in heaven, and with a slight bit of twisting of the Catholic teaching, they convinced me that I would, but only as a favor to me from God. They said that animals could not get into heaven on their own, but if a pet owner made it to heaven, they still want to see their pets again, God could bring their pets to heaven too. That made sense to me. It didn't take away all of my sadness, but it was much better than the alternative. About a year later, I remember a school shooting that took place, and it was all over the news. Fox News, particularly, was abuzz about how the killers were atheists and specifically targeted those that believed in God. I mean, I have a generic picture here, but I wish I remember which shooting it was. I know it was in 97. The capacity for a child to go on a shooting spree was implicitly blamed on a lack of belief in God and explicitly blamed on the rising popularity of violent video games. Many Christians and Catholics sincerely believed that if there was no God, heaven or hell doesn't exist either, then there's no such thing as right and wrong. If we're all just animals, then it wouldn't matter if you went on a killing spree. After all, nobody cares when we kill millions of germs by washing our hands. This was quite a scary thought, and it made me scared of anyone who didn't believe in God. It even made me fearful of believers that weren't serious about their faith. The way I saw it was the further away you were from God, the closer you were to the devil and hell and to that moral nihilism. When I first learned about hell, I didn't have a problem with it. I was actually glad to hear that evil people were punished in the afterlife. But then I learned what Jesus said about Judas, the apostle, one of the 12 who betrayed him. In Matthew 26:24, Jesus said, "Woe to that man by whom the Son of Man shall be betrayed. It were better for him if that man had not been born." And I thought, yeah, that makes sense, but if that's true, then why did God make him in the first place? If God knows the future, and he knows who will go to heaven and who will go to hell in the future, why not just create those people he knows will end up going to heaven? I brought this question up to my mom as we were driving to my grandparents' house one day. Her answer was, well, God lets everyone have a free choice. If God only created people who made the right choice, he would in a way be preventing some people, the bad people, from having their choice. I was not entirely satisfied with this answer, because I had a hard time believing that anyone would freely choose hell, but I let it go for the time being. As I got older, I was able to watch some of the more mature content that EWTN had to offer. Definitely not mature in the way you're thinking. There was a great documentary on Saint Padre Pio that reenacted his life. It showed how he dealt with terrifying demonic attacks and spiritual warfare, even at an early age. It was called The Night of the Prophet. There was also the classic movie Jesus of Nazareth that they usually played around Easter time. The realism and intensity of these movies really hit home for me and painted a very clear picture of what I considered to be accurate history. When I went to my first Opus Dei camping trip, there was a priest there who had personally done exorcisms himself, and he told us all about his firsthand experiences with the devil that were both scary and fascinating. They made for great campfire stories. Unfortunately, I tried telling the kids there that watching movies with sexual content like Titanic was a mortal sin. Since most of them were only Catholic by name, none of them took my warning seriously at all. It was around this time that I also learned more about the compelling miracles that were exclusively associated with the Catholic Church that I knew of. Because these miracles seemed authentic and were specifically Catholic, learning about them did a lot to strengthen my trust in the Catholic Church. First, there were two miraculous images. There was the Shroud of Turin, which I learned about from a documentary called The Silent Witness, and the Virgin of Guadalupe, which I learned about from my parents. Both of these images were not only unexplainable by science, but they each had additional supernatural properties that further verified their authenticity and made them impossible to duplicate. Yeah, I learned more later, otherwise. But this is what I thought at the time. I didn't have internet in my pocket. There was also the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano. The story goes back around the year 700 AD. A priest who doubted the truth of the Eucharist, which is the truth is that it's actually Jesus' present body and soul. He witnessed it miraculously turn into human flesh in his hands during the consecration. The consecration is the step that changes it from the bread to the body of Christ. Upon later analysis, even by the World Health Organization, the host was found to be real flesh and incorruptible, meaning it would never deteriorate. Speaking of incorruptible flesh, the bodies of incorruptible Catholic saints were another very compelling and convincing part of my Catholic world that I learned about from a book called The Incorruptibles. Lastly, when it came to miracles, there was a documentary called Tears from Heaven about a statue of Jesus in Bolivia that would cry human tears and shed human blood. It was investigated thoroughly by skeptics and scientists, even going so far as to put it through a CAT scanner, and the blood and tears were real and originated from the statue, which had no holes or inner mechanisms. Slightly disturbing, but fascinating. I was unaware of any other religion that had such fascinating evidence supporting their belief system, and I considered people who dismiss these miracles as either blind or closed-minded. I mean, what more proof could you ask for? LOL. It's so funny how when you get older, you realize that there's like dead giveaways that make things make absolutely no sense, even before you investigate it. All right, so that's chapters 1 and 2, and more on the way later. Thanks for watching.